Deputies Pitman, your previous press release, you were calling for the UK Justice Minister to fulfil his obligation and restore the rule of law to the island. Judging by this latest press release, your request fell on deaf ears.
Sadly, that seems to be very much the case. We did write to the UK Justice Minister. We even had a group of around a dozen political figures, 2 or 3 justice campaigners who also wrote expressing their concerns. We even tried to meet the Justice Minister when he visited Jersey, but unfortunately we were blocked in doing that by the Chief Minister's office. The conclusion of all this was that all the Justice Minister, Lord McNally, felt he could do was actually refer us back to the bailiff, who of course is the very man who allowed this to happen by not ensuring that Judge Le Breton recused himself when he was so obviously deeply conflicted.
Deputy Shona Pitman, you said earlier it's sort of like being mugged and having to appeal to the mugger. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement. It's just ridiculous that the only person you can appeal to is the person that you're who's allowed this to happen. So really, in Jersey, if the Minister for Justice in the UK won't act, where do people over here go to?
So what you've got to consider here is that obviously this was a 3-year-long legal battle. We've got no money left to employ lawyers or whatever. So having been notified by members of the public about the problems here, the conflict of Judge Le Breton, the horrifying revelations within the Sharp report about his past attitude to looking at evidence, we've gone all the routes we can to get this rectified. We've gone to the bailiff, we've gone to the island's Chief Minister, we've gone to the UK Justice Minister, who has an obligation, let's not forget, to make sure law and order, good governance actually functions in the island. We've even last month met twice with the Lieutenant Governor, who's the Queen's representative. Now, every one of those has come up with some excuse why they cannot intervene. The concern for us, and let's remember too that this isn't just about us. We're politicians. We've got a comparative platform. We've got a voice. Yet, as where Shona and myself are finding out since we've started to make this public, there's literally dozens of people out there. Maybe there's hundreds who they haven't got money. They haven't got the platform that we've got. So they're faced with being ruined, and that's, to put it in a nutshell, is what we face.
Well, we know with Deputy Mike Higgins also, and yourself, Deputy Mike Higgins has said he's been inundated with allegations of corruption, whether it be within the police force, the judicial system.
Yep.
You're inundated, so this doesn't seem to be like an isolated case, does it?
Well, clearly we're not an isolated case. I mean, Shona and myself both stood, ironically, on social justice platforms. To be honest, I never thought I'd be actually trying to fight for justice for myself, and we're hoping that in doing this, that we can't just actually do something about justice in our case, but perhaps we can be a rallying point, a focus for those people out there who have been betrayed really by Jersey's justice system, and they've got nowhere to go.
And I think that's the only benefit of going through this experience with the courts and justice over here, is that you get to learn how other people are being treated, and how difficult it must be, frustrating for people, ordinary people who just haven't had the money, like Trevor says, haven't had the platform to stand up to these people, and that's why it continues.
After the last, when you asked your previous press release, and you asked Lord McNally to fulfil his obligation to restore the rule of law, you then submitted a personal statement to be read out in the island's parliament.
Mm-hmm.
What was that about, and what happened to it?
Well, basically, that was Shona submitted a statement on behalf of both of us, outlining what we have been through these past 3 years, and particularly the last year. And it was about trying to highlight, this justice system is not fit for purpose. And of course, as you'd understand, it had to criticise the bailiff in his role as head of the judiciary. And what happened? The actual statement was banned. We were blocked. Shona was blocked from presenting it by the very bailiff, the same bailiff who took his judicial hat off and put on his legislative hat on, and prevented that being read in public. So, where do you go? You try to do the right thing. We're not appealing for favours for anyone. We just want justice. And yet it seems there's an absolute determination to suppress all of this.
Well, it does show with that conflict of interest with the bailiff. One minute he's the head of the judiciary, then he's the speaker in the parliament, who you've got to ask permission from. Is it a sustainable conflict? I mean, surely he must be possibly the most powerful man on this island. He's obviously got more power than you guys have as politicians.
Yeah.
Because he just says, "I'm not going to let you say this or ask that." How does that function in a 21st century?
Well, it doesn't. It shouldn't function. But unfortunately, a few years ago, I brought a proposition to the states to try and get rid of the dual role. But there are states members who have their own interests in maintaining that, and they call it tradition. But it's often they have their own interests, but a lot of it as well is about deference to the bailiff and not wanting to question his position and him personally.
So what was interesting the other day, that a number of us, actually only 17 of us out of 51 members, turned up to meet the Justice Select Committee. And just as Shona was saying, we brought the dual role up. And the argument was being made incredibly by these 3 UK politicians that there were no examples of how the two roles interfered or overlapped. So I was actually able to use this very example. Here's the bailiff being criticised in his role as head of the judiciary, taking that hat off, putting on his hat as president of the legislature, and preventing that criticism of himself being heard.
And there's also, in the States, we can ask questions, as you know, but they have to be approved by the bailiff himself. And Trevor and Mike Higgins have recently been asking questions, possibly criticising the judicial system, and this is where there is that obvious conflict.
Well, I mean, this interview has taken me down a different route here. I mean, at the end of the day, I've got a few questions to ask, but I just want to slip this in. The judicial system runs this island. Can you argue with that?
Well, it's certainly not politicians, is it?
Well, no, this is what's coming up time and time again, isn't it? It's the judicial system. In your previous press statement, you said the judicial system is used as a tool of oppression against those who speak out. Well, here's even more evidence of it, isn't there, when you can't even have personal statements read out or anything?
Yeah. Well, personal statements are protected in standing orders, or at least they're meant to be. But clearly, whether that gets heard or not comes down to one man, who also, as we said, happens to be head of the judiciary. That's got no place in the 21st century.
I suppose I've got to ask, why the press release now? Why not go through this court case, because you're asking for leave to appeal and go through the court. Why not go through the court case and then publish a press release on the conclusion of the case?
Well, I think you only have to look at what's been going on recently with a secret court case against former Senator Stuart Sivray, where no one's allowed to talk about it. Anyone who rocks the boat, any dissenting voice who speaks out too loudly, finds themselves being oppressed. And really, if you look at this is a big case. There are huge issues at stake here. A jurat system which clearly does not work. It's not monitored. They're answerable to themselves. Any criticism, it comes back to the superior number, which is basically the jurats themselves with the bailiff. So why have the statement now? Well, I'd have to say that the establishment and certain elements of the media who seem so beholden to them, this story is just being suppressed. It needs to be made public, because not just for us, but for the ordinary man and woman out there who haven't got our platform, this will never get heard. It can be swept under the carpet. So really going public, and as we're seeing more and more on the internet, you know, the shock out there in the wider world that what's going on in Jersey, we have to keep making this public, because that is probably the only chance for democracy and law and order and justice to actually be re-established in this island.
Because it is taken now, it's going to another level now, isn't it? You just touched on it there, the former Senator Stuart Silveray's secret, from what we can gather, but we've got no evidence to show, this is a taxpayer-funded secret court case going on in a 21st century democracy. What kind of a message does this put out to the outside world, do you think?
Well, I think it's certainly showing that beneath all the trappings, the veneer of democracy, Jersey is nothing of the sort. And it comes back to what you raised earlier. It's the judiciary that run this island. You mess with them at your peril. Now, there's a saying that most members in the States are what we call silent assassins. They do nothing, they say nothing in the hope that they'll get re-elected. If you put your heads over the parapet, as Shona and myself and a handful of others have done, you clearly face huge negative consequences. And obviously that's what's happening to us. I mean, we face, as a result of something that's clearly not human rights compliant, the right to a fair trial, we face financial ruin. We've gone down all the right paths to get this rectified. And remember, this was all brought to our attention by members of the public, concerned members of the public.
After the case.
After the case. And yet...
Sorry, what was brought to your attention?
The conflict with the jurat being the friend of the director, one of the directors of the Gitton Group who own the JP.
Who were the defendants in your court case. It was touched on a little bit earlier, the jurats. You wanted to look at I wanted to look at the way they are elected. It's another sticking point, and their accountability. And even are they even monitored, jurats?
No. Well, firstly, they're elected by politicians and lawyers, and to me there's an obvious conflict there with lawyers, because they're going to be presiding over their cases. So that the other issue is that the only criterion which jurats are, if you like, disallowed to become a jurat is if they have broken the 1948 Poor Law. Other than that, they can get in. And obviously, in our case, the jurat, as a former teacher, turned a blind eye to evidence that showed child abuse, and still he was allowed to preside as a jurat for 14 years, and this was not questioned at any point. So there is no monitoring at all with jurats, and they are basically, the judiciary is a law unto itself.
Well, we know, is there any way they can even be disciplined?
Well, this is probably what says it all about a system that belongs in another century. Everything Shona said is right there, but jurats are actually not monitored, it seems, in any proper form. If one should display behaviour which would clearly denote that they're not a suitable person to be a jurat, and surely Jurat Le Breton had done so, they're actually only subject to scrutiny from the superior number, which is basically the other jurats, their friends, on the jurats, and the bailiff. And I don't think there's ever been a case, certainly not in modern times, where any discipline has actually happened. So we've seen here a man who is revealed within the Sharp report, Stephen Sharp report into the abuse at Victoria College. He refused to look at video evidence against a predatory paedophile. He was then actually put forward by a former president of the Education Committee, a States member, a constable, and he was allowed to sit there for 14 years. Two bailiffs did nothing to remove him or even question his ability in that time.
But here's the rub, here's the stinger. 2 bailiffs have allowed this jurat to sit for 14 years after this. Well, let's not go into that. And you have to complain to
one of them,
bailiff.
the bailiff,
Which we have, and we've told him, we've made these points to him, but the only advice he gave us was to go to appeal. He didn't question the conflict. He didn't question the jurat that presided over our case.
Or his own decision to allow the jurat to stay in place.
And we've seen similar incredible reactions in the States. As you may recall, we saw Senator Balash, the other former bailiff, who launched into a scathing personal attack on me for daring to ask questions about the jurat system. You know, an attack on me that was so scathing that 3 members, Deputy Higgins I think it was, Tadyer and Southern, all tried to object. But of course it was overruled by the chair that day, who happened to be Senator Balash's younger brother.
Deputy bailiff.
Indeed, the deputy bailiff. So where do you go? Where do you go? Everyone is entitled to justice. We should be no different to anyone else. We're not expecting to be different to anyone else. But if, as we repeat again, if with the platform we've got, if this has been done to us, and you have to ask yourselves, maybe it's very appealing to some people out there that if we could be bankrupted, because then we would be silenced as politicians.
You can't stand if you
can't stand for re-election.
Now, wouldn't that be convenient to some establishment members?
It would be. To wrap up on deputies, what happens if you are refused leave to appeal in this case, or indeed even if you do lose the case? By your own admission, you're going to be financially ruined. Where do we go? Where do you go from losing this case or this appeal?
We'll take it to the European Court of Human Rights under the Article 6 of a right to a fair trial, because it's obvious that we haven't had one. So we won't be stopping if we lose the appeal.
Even if that means being litigants in person?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, that's where we've been driven, you know. I mean, litigants in person is not something that's easy to do. I mean, neither of us are legally trained, and obviously there's going to be many people out there who they just couldn't do that because they wouldn't have the ability. However, you know, during this process, my dad died. He never got to see us have justice. Will I stop fighting now? Even if I am ruined, I'm going to get justice. I have a responsibility to my family. I've got a responsibility to all those people out there who've been in contact with us over the last few months to fight for justice and ensure it happens. And I've got a big responsibility in my own heart to my dad. Justice should not be about who you are and how deep your pockets are. We're committed to this now, and we will keep fighting until we do get justice.